Oh, hello. Thank you for coming into my presentation today. My name is Samson Omale, and I will be making this presentation as part of the assignment for the module 1 of Foundation Concepts and Theories on Global Economic Growth and Competitiveness. The outline for my presentation is as follows. I'll look at trade theory and policy, look at globalization, competitiveness, protectionism, measures of growth, and I'll be concluding. The goal of differentiation, of course, is to explain these concepts and theories on global economic growth and competitiveness. I'll define economic growth, look at the pillars of economic growth, global economic growth, and competitiveness, and also implications for policymaking. Now, the theory of trade and the policy of trade has certain pillars. Otherwise, the pillars that guide or on which global economic growth and competitiveness rests include a trade policy that brings out certain rules and guidelines that guide global economic trade generally. Second pillar is globalization. These are the things that make for global economic growth and competitiveness. Globalization. Thirdly, competitiveness. And fourthly, protectionism. And these are the core concepts that will either lead to a growth of global economy or reduce. Now, so what is economic growth? It relates to the increase in the quantity of goods and services produced over time. The economic growth itself is determined by creativity, motivation, innovations, and production. In terms of creativity, you will need people to bring new ideas. Of course, place is important. The environment is very important. Is the environment, conducive for creativity? Talk about the environment, look at the local government, the government in place. Is it democratic government? And the school system, does it bring about quality graduates that have ideas? Does it stimulate research? These are the things that bring about creativity. And once creativity is positive, it will lead to economic growth. Then innovations is improving on what already exists. And with a changing world, innovation is very important. And look at the factors of production. Does it make production less expensive and faster and better? Also, the rate of development, does it increase? So innovations is an improvement over an existing technology or other invention that is in place. Then, of course, production is important for economic growth. And look at the implementation of the production indices, production formulas and ideas. And once they're implemented, coming from creativity, innovation, and it leads to production. Once these ideas are implemented, they lead to production, and that will lead to economic growth. And economic growth itself is measured by the GDP. From our notes, I can say that we can think of GDP as a measure of aggregate output in three equivalent ways. Number one, GDP is the value of the final goods and services produced in the economy during a given period. Secondly, it could be the total value of value added in the economy, the total sum of the value added in an economy during a given period. And thirdly, it can be measured as the sum of incomes in the economy during a given period. Each of these will give a different result and interpretation and usage. But these are the major three ways in which we can measure GDP. But GDP itself is composed of consumption, investment, and government inventory, plus the net of export and import. So economic GDP growth is influenced, of course, by the size of the economy. Like I said, these are the components: the sum of the consumption, investment, government spending, inventory, and export and minus less imports. Now, there are several theories that guide global economic competitiveness. And we take it from Adam Smith in 1776 that came out with the theory of capital accumulation. You know, Adam Smith talks about division of labor, two things: division of labor and capital accumulation. And capital accumulation itself is conditioned by the extent of the market. How advanced is the market? How big is the market? They're talking of geographical factors, the political, legal environment of the market. If the market is conducive, then labor and capital accumulation will lead to economic growth. Second theory is by Malthusian theory. Malthusian theory essentially is about population growth. It stated that population growth is potentially exponential. It grows faster, but the growth of food and food supply, on the other hand, is linear. Now, what happens, therefore, is that eventually it reduces living standard to the point of triggering population to slow down or to die off. So essentially, if that is the case, the growth will be stunted. But if food supply is commensurate or moves along with population growth, then it will impact the overall economic growth. So essentially, Malthusian theory talks about the relationship between the rate of growth of population and food supply are different. While population is exponential, increasing by the year, by the number, by the world is 8 billion now as of today, but the growth of food supply is not commensurate with population growth. The third is the classical growth theory, which talks about production and growth, which are based on sustainability, and law of variable proportions. Now, essentially, what classical theory, growth theory talks about is increasing the factors of production. If the factors of production can be increased, like labor and capital, while holding other constant and assuming no technological change takes place, it will increase to output will increase, but at a diminishing role that will eventually approach a zero level. So production and growth are based on ability to sustain the law of variables proportions. The fourth classical model or theory is the slow swan model. Essentially, is what they call exogenous model. Now, this model assumes that there are diminishing returns to capital and labor. So capital accumulates through investment, but its level of stock continually decreases due to depreciation. Of course, most things, I mean, either that there's age or obsolescence that sets in. So essentially, Swan, slow Swan model is exogenous, you know, impacts coming from outside. Opposite the exogenous model is the endogenous growth theory, which talks about the technological process is from within. The technological progress coming from within, and this model uh, incorporates human capital, which is interpreted from the changes to investment patterns in education, training, healthcare by private sector firms of governments. So it's from within. It's not from outside. Within, if you can change the investment patterns in education, the quality of education, training, and healthcare, that's typically development of capital, human capital, then it will lead to growth. It will lead to growth positively. Number 6 is the unified growth theory, bringing all the 4-5 theories together. The unified theory talks about population growth, living standards that will come to near subsistence across time. But in trying to reinforce the interaction between the rate of technological progress and the size of the composition of the population, it has gradually increased the space of technological process, enhancing importance of education and ability of the individuals to adapt to the changing technological environment. So bringing these two together, the unified growth talks about the population, and of course, the quality of the population is dependent upon the quality of education and the ability of the individuals to be able to adapt to the changing technological environment. And lastly, the inequality and growth theory talks about, again, that's Adam Smith and others. So they suggest that inequality fosters the growth process, specifically since the aggregate savings increases with inequality due to the high propensity to save among the wealthy and classical viewpoint. They suggest that inequality stimulates capital accumulation and therefore leads to economic growth. So these are essentially the economic growths that are propagated, have been refined over the years to explain economic growth, global economic growth. Now, so that takes us to now the concept or the trend of globalization. And the concept of globalization is as depicted from our notes, this diagram that is here, where you have exports, imports, direct investment, capital transfers, technology, all changing hand. The world has become a global place. Globalization essentially is about facilitating international travel with border transportation, making communication and information sharing easy through advances in technology. You can do things from the comfort of your home now through technology, and they are affecting business outside. Also, the reduction of tariffs, barriers, and promoting world trade is what globalization is all about, making everybody accessible, market open to everyone, and also expanding the world's media. So essentially, the things that globalization does, that there are advantages and their disadvantages, of course. If you start from the advantages, we look at employment growth, because there's expansion of the economy globally. Of course, it leads to employment to be able to cope with the demands, increasing compensation, a high level of living, encourages mutual understanding across cultures because you have to collaborate, and encouraging economic growth. So all these are the impacts, the positive impacts of globalization. Of course, there are downsides of it. Instability in the market, because as we're going to see later, the competitiveness that comes in, or the lack of material resources and demand supply inadequacies or inequalities will lead to instability in the marketplace. Also, causes of environmental damage. In a quest to meet the demands, there's overproduction, and land and pollution have been the case. So it causes environmental damages because of the growth. What it does is to increase our production levels, and that will have impact on the environment. And it encourages worldwide economic recessions, because it's growing out of hand over the years. Now, the main drivers of globalization is, of course, like we said, liberalization of trade and multilateralism, no more boundaries, regional economic integration, trade blocks, and free trade, international trade production, competitiveness, pattern of international trade, growth, interdependence, the various that drive globalization. So I've already talked about the benefits and the costs. Benefits and the costs. It enables us to reap benefits from tighter competition between firms, greater division of labor and productivity enhancer, wider market exploitation of economies of scale, and broader product differentiation, wider choice between different varieties of products. There's also higher mobility of productive factors and factors like labor and technology. Labor and technology and financial capital, and the increased mobility of financial capital it's a source of better allocation of savings, fund transfer from saver and lender to borrowers. Improves risk management, wider risk management diversification, all benefits of globalization. But there are costs to them as well. It's harmful to some agents since it causes structural changes leading to new relative scarcities and boundaries. Technologies have to be adjusted, innovation has to be put in place. So in the course of changing that or adjusting to that, there will be relative scarcities and in place. Lower compensation for some factors of production, because people have access to same materials at a cheaper rate. There will be an arbitrage, and that will cause other people to lose on business or on income. Also, race to the bottom from our notes is a phenomenon that is taking advantages from different standards, leading to critical situations, like I said, arbitrage that will occur. So what are the impact of globalization on international business cycle? Number one, it increases cross-border trade and financial linkages, increasing synchronization, reducing incidence of truly global shocks like oil shocks, increasing importance of country-specific shocks, and also lead to this later, reducing incidence of truly global and increasing importance will contribute to a decrease in the synchronization of growth or production factors. So that takes me to another component of global growth, which is competitiveness. Competitiveness is the capacity of a country or company to generate goods and services that can compete on global market. And the competition is based on competitive advantages. If one country has resources that the other country does not have, or technologies or manpower or human capacity, they compete on these competitive advantages. They gain on what they have advantages of: competitive advantages, price competitiveness, perspective of management strategies, and other factors. The connection between economic growth and competitiveness can shift in response to a wide range of factors. How can competitiveness lead to growth? Number one, economic and non-economic factors. Economic factors like GDP, tax, cash flows. Non-economic factors like droughts and other force majeure factors. Social and environmental. Medical, such as pandemic. We just passed through a pandemic some 2-3 years ago. Political turmoil. There'll be impeachment and two impeachment in South Korea just the past few days, when the prime minister just woke up one day and began and wanted to install or impose a martial law that has left a political chaos in South Korea. Geopolitical, the war that's going on between Ukraine and Russia, the Middle East crisis, and macroeconomic things like GDP, inflation, all causes things that can make competitiveness to be either profitable, leading to growth, or not. The GDP, like I said before, the factor that influence GDP and how to measure competitiveness is also through the GDP. You can measure GDP, and GDP is influenced by the size of the economy, of course. The countries will pursue whatever angle of globalization that suits them. It's also their success is dependent upon the size of their GDP. Financial market, is it developed or is still in its infancy? Can it attract foreign investors? Can it attract foreign loans? Human capital, look at the health and education. Political situations, is there instability going on there? Democracy, or is it military authoritarianism, or socialist, communist? Then entrepreneurs and new products. If the entrepreneurs are bringing new products that people will want, it will lead to economic growth. Another thing that impacts economic growth is protectionism. Protectionism deals with economic policies of restraining trade, and they use things like tariffs and quotas or other regulations that burden foreign producers especially, but gives advantage to domestic producers. And so protectionism, tax tariff on imports, that makes it higher for people to buy, and therefore they will not buy. And quotas, restriction on the quantity of goods that will be imported, maximum amount of automobiles, for example, that can be imported in a country for a period of time. So this will affect the producers of such items. So how might it restrict trade? Imposing tariffs or temporary tariffs on imported goods will lead to will impact that. Granting subsidies to domestic producers, imposing non-tariff barriers to foreign goods, distribution of losses of gains, bad for consumers because they have to pay more, good for domestic producers, but they are overall bad for the growth of an economy. So if you're imposing tariffs, granting subsidies, this will restrict free trade in itself. So as I begin to conclude, I discover that economic activity itself is changing and transforming continuously. Its end result, the final product is supposed to, number one, address new, developing, and evolving needs manifested as market demand originating from a diverse and transforming consumer base. This principle has been underpinning industrial development with increasing output levels and fueling consumerism, engaging rising resource consumption, and generating waste and pollution. All economic concepts have different sides, some positive, some will be negative. The ability of policymakers to make their own advantages more than the disadvantages is what can lead to economic growth. And there lies why not all economies can benefit from such concepts. The third world, the developing economies, for example, are shortchanged in this globalization concept and all that because they don't have the ability to cope with it. So efforts like regional economic groups, principles, and rules of engagement are essential to make it more equitable to all. The ultimate goal, of course, is to be able to increase the real income of citizens and also improve the quality of lives. This is because the competitiveness of a nation is not an end in itself, but it means to an end. You should be able to create a level playing ground for all so that other economies who are evolving or developing can be a beneficiary of global economic growth and competitiveness. Thank you so much. References are taken from this place. Thank you.